This podcast is brought to you by Meteorate.
G'day folks, and welcome to podcast number 10 of the Seriously Funny Wellbeing Show. I'm your co-host Homer Papantonio, and with me, please welcome the perpetually irrepressible and highly knowledgeable Dr. Ross Walker. Ross,
hello, Homer.
Hope you're doing fine.
I'm fine, mate. Ready to go.
That's good. The subject of today's podcast is dementia, what it is and how it can it be prevented. But let's start off with maybe some humour, a bit of Homer's humour. And Ross, you'd agree that achieving a reasonable level of well-being had a lot to do with having money.
Oh, yeah, it's been shown beyond a doubt. Once you get to a certain income level, there is well-being that goes with it. And people who are tragically living in the lower socioeconomic groups, there's no doubt that their well-being is not as much as they'd like it to be.
But do you know, for me, it was really a tough road. The suburb of Melbourne that I grew up in was very tough. You could walk 10 blocks without leaving the scene of a crime. We were
Very good.
We were so poor that we went to the beach. The seagulls used to throw chips at us. We were so poor that my mother used to buy my clothes from the local army disposal store. It wasn't too bad if you don't mind going to school dressed like a Japanese admiral. No, it was really, really tough. I only had two friends. They were both imaginary, and they'd only talked to each other. You know.
Mm.
And instead of a foreskin, I only got a threeskin. It's all right. It was no skin off my nose, as they say. But
Yep.
So let's move on. Have you got any dad jokes to kick this off?
Oh, look, I do, because I went to the doctor the other day with some hearing problems.
Yeah.
And he said to me, "Can you describe the symptoms?" And I said, "Yeah, Homer's the fat guy and Marge is the one with the blue hair."
Oh, so medical news. Let's get on to it. Diet and colorectal cancer in young people.
Yeah, the one of the big tragedies is over the past couple of decades, the rates of colorectal cancer has increased in people under the age of 50. And for a number of years, it was said, well, we're not really sure why. But the studies now have shown, there's a study out of the Cleveland Clinic that looked at the diet-derived molecules that you get from having too much red meat, but especially, and this is the big thing, is the processed meats. And so the processed meats are very clearly linked to colorectal cancer. And I in younger people, and I really think when it comes to red meat, I don't have a problem with people having their red meat once or twice a week maybe, and not heavily cooked. But when you char grill red meat, there are all of these chemicals that are released in the red meat that are carcinogenic. So I think really it's the processed meats and the what's going on in those, what foodstuffs we're getting in there and what chemicals we're getting in the sulfites and everything else in those processed meats and the nitrites. But it's also the char grilling of steak that really is contributing to colorectal cancer. And it's just a tragedy that we're seeing so much more in younger people.
Yeah. Even like sausages, you'd classify as processed meat.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Even though they say that these turkey sausages and lean meat sausages.
Yeah, well, look, no one knows, because these sort of sausages are around for the last 10 years since all the yuppies have come into the whole butchering trade. And so we don't know what those sausages are doing, because a lot of this is more historic data, because let me just tell you something about cancer. It takes one cancer cell 9 years to become a 2-centimetre tumour. So when someone says, oh, I got cancer because of this stressful event in my life, no, you didn't. The cancer was brewing for many years before the stress, but the stress may have accelerated the generation of that cancer.
I had a friend that worked in a sausage factory. This isn't a joke.
Yeah. No.
And he still doesn't know what goes into a sausage.
Yeah, well, there's a bit of a snag in that argument, but anyhow.
Okay, good one. Future of medicine, real-time inflammation monitoring.
Yeah, look, I thought I'd bring this one up because people hear the term inflammation thrown around all the time and they don't really know what it is. So I thought I'd just give I think we probably should spend a whole podcast on this, but a very brief explanation. We were designed to wander around a jungle for 30, 40 years, have our head ripped off by a saber-toothed tiger or die of some infection in our 30s and 40s. And so our immune system really only evolved to deal with acute trauma or acute inflammation from infection. But when we live beyond our use-by date, which is beyond 40, and double our use-by date, which is because the average age of death for a male is around 80, for a female around 84, we get exposed to so many more toxins in our life, and we also are overnourishing ourselves. And so therefore there's a chronic immune response to all of those toxins and all of that excessive nourishment. And that's where chronic inflammation comes in. So we've now developed ways of assessing people for inflammation. And there's a very simple test called HSCRP, which is just a blood test. But you have to go to the doctor and have a form given, and you go to the pathology place, have your blood taken. It's a bit of a tedious exercise. Now, this new group in Poland has developed a technique, a real-time measuring technique with the chips about the size of a credit card, where you can basically just pinprick the finger, put the chip on, and it tells you what your inflammatory status is. Now, it's still at the moment being used in hospitals and in doctors' surgeries. But there will come a time, in the same way now with many watches, you can get an ECG and measure your oxygen level, etc., etc. I think we're moving towards that real-time monitoring. You can now put a little device under your skin which can do continuous glucose monitoring.
Yes.
And so there's the possibility of incorporating that continuous glucose monitor with a continuous inflammatory monitor. Now, again, most people are walking around, they're feeling fine. But during winter, I mean, I've had about 3 respiratory infections this winter. I've just had a bad winter for respiratory infections. But the HSCRP tells you how much it's affecting you. And to give you an example, the normal range is below 5. That's the number we say. If your immune system is really buzzing, your HSCRP is below 1.5. But if you've got a bit of a minor viral illness, it might be in the 10 to 20 range. But if you, say, have acute leukemia or myeloma or an acute autoimmune disease, it might go up to 100. I've seen some people with acute severe influenza, 250. So I'm just saying it's a good way just to monitor your immune system, a simple way, and I think it will move towards the hospital point of care to possibly having it on your phone, or a simple thing like a continuous monitor for inflammation.
So
interesting stuff.
CRP stands for creative reactive
No,
protein.
No, sort of.
Yeah.
Highly sensitive C-reactive protein.
Yeah.
Capital C reactive protein.
That's
It's made in the liver.
fairly significant, isn't it? Because there's a school of thought that says virtually every disease is inflammatory.
That's true.
Inflammation.
Let me make an important point for everyone listening. Every disease is genetic. Even your response to infection and trauma is basically based on what your genetic makeup is. But your genes loads the gun, the environment pulls the trigger. And so the next layer up from those genes is chronic inflammation. So you've got the genetic predisposition to that particular problem, then the chronic inflammation then pushes you in the direction of the disease.
Okay, that's great. So I'm sure when I say these two words, most blokes would reach for their groin. Body of evidence, chronic itch.
Yeah, well, this is a bit more than just reach that sort of issue, which is what you're referring to. Now, it's interesting. There's a thing called fever of unknown origin, which is when you have a fever that's been there for a couple of months and no one knows what's causing it. But now there's a new term, chronic pruritus of unknown origin, CPUO. And pruritus is the medical term for itch. So doctors made up all these silly names years ago to make them sound intelligent. So pruritus is basically itch. We're not talking about groin itch here, Homer. We're talking about a generalised itch where there's no obvious reason for it, but it's driving the poor person nuts, not what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
Driving other nuts. But what they found is that in these people, when they measure the amino acids, which are the breakdown products of protein in their bloodstream, that there are 9 amino acids that have a reduced level. So they're saying that there's the potential in the future to possibly modulate amino acids, and that may improve itch. But there's a few buts here. They've also now come up with these immunotherapies, which are being used for cancer or autoimmune disease, because a lot of people, you think, oh, it's only an itch, what's the big deal? But it can be disabling for some people. And so there's this new treatment called abrocitinib, which targets inflammation, and it's now been approved for eczema. Excuse me, mate. Oh, sorry, I had to cough. I have to cut that one out.
Okay.
So what I do at the moment, if I've got a patient who's got a chronic itch, I use a combination of 3 therapies. Firstly, what we call an standard antihistamine that everyone knows, something like Telfast or the other one, Claritine.
Mm.
But I also use so that's an H1 blocker, histamine 1 blocker. Histamine is very important in generation of itch. I also use an H2 blocker, which is also used for ulcers. So people would have heard about drugs like Zantac, cimetidine. They're off the market now. But there are newer drugs, Tarzac and Nyzac, which do the same thing. So I use that with an old-style antidepressant. That can take the itch away, but with these newer therapies, that'll be much more effective.
Are we talking about skin itch?
Yeah.
Okay, so my mum, being a Greek origin, she always was a big advocate for vinegar and lemon juice for all itches. And sure enough, I don't know whether it was psychosomatic, but it went away after you had an itch. You're talking about severe
I'm talking about
itches.
people whose life is being driven crazy by itching.
Wow.
It does happen. It's not uncommon. Not uncommon.
Okay. Controversies. Teaser for Ozempic. Is it really a miracle drug?
Yep. Well, look, I want to talk more about Ozempic because it really is the blockbuster drug of the last decade.
Yes.
And many people are using it. There's been a worldwide shortage because overweight people are using it because it was initially developed for diabetes. And the overweight diabetics lost the bucket of weight, so they gave it to a bunch of non-diabetics, and they also lost the bucket of weight. So it's really been the most successful weight loss drug ever invented. And we've also found there's some incredible benefits from it, and I'll talk about that in another podcast. Yeah. But a recent study's just come out suggesting that there was a higher incidence of suicidal ideation and a higher incidence of self-harm in the people who used Ozempic. But another study's just come out in the last week refuting that. So, and this is the problem. You hear one study says one thing, another study says another thing, and there's that wonderful comment by Disraeli about damn lies and statistics, and so I think we should focus on this in another podcast, to have a full podcast on weight loss and Ozempic, and what is the way forward, what are the benefits, but what are the cautions.
So the drug, it is a drug. It's not a natural supplement, is it?
Ozempic? Oh, no. It's a thing called a GLP-1 receptor agonist, and it has profound effects on many metabolic pathways in the body. Okay. And I'll explain that on another podcast we'll do in a few weeks' time.
Okay. So, Ross, our main topic for this week's podcast is dementia. What it is and how can it be prevented? So just a quick introduction. As you know, Ross, dementia is a term used to describe a group of symptoms affecting memory, thinking, and social abilities. In people who have dementia, the symptoms interfere with their daily lives. And dementia isn't one specific disease. Several diseases can cause dementia. Dementia generally involves memory loss. It's often one of the early symptoms of the condition, but having memory loss alone doesn't mean you have dementia. Memory loss can have different causes. And Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia in older adults, but there are other causes of dementia depending on the cause. Some dementia symptoms might be reversible. So over to you, Ross.
Okay. Well, look, dementia is, as you say, the blanket term for those 3 categories, the problems with memory loss, thinking, and social behaviours. And really, dementia, once you've developed it, is traditionally not reversible. sometimes you may get some improvements, but really it's a downhill, horrible disease. And about 60, some studies say 80% is due to Alzheimer's disease, but I want to put a clarification on that. There's also a pretty common thing called vascular dementia. So vascular dementia is where people have multiple mini strokes, which destroys the brain, whereas Alzheimer's is a different thing, which I'll get to in a second. And there's less common variants of dementia. There's a dementia associated with Parkinson's disease. That's often called Lewy body dementia. Frontotemporal dementia is another one, Niemann-Pick's disease. But then there are the toxic causes of dementia, and the big one is alcohol. So that old granddad died of dementia, and old granddad was just a heavy drinker, so he didn't really have Alzheimer's. He just poisoned his brain with alcohol. And interestingly, there's two alcohol-related dementia syndromes. One's called Wernicke's encephalopathy, which is often associated with a thiamine deficiency as well, where they get a whole lot of visual problems and other neurologic issues. Another one's a thing called Korsakoff psychosis, where people, it's alcohol-induced, but people just completely lose their short-term memory. So they can do something and a few seconds later, they've completely forgotten. But another big emerging cause of dementia, which has had a huge amount of airplay in the last 10 years, has been chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So CTE, that we're seeing a lot of athletes, like Muhammad Ali's the poster boy, the poster child for CTE. But many footballers have had issues. We saw the coach of the North Queensland Cowboys, Paul Green, tragically took his own life, and it was said that was due to CTE. Poor Steve Folkes, a rugby league player for Canterbury, and I think he also played for Australia. He died in his 50s from CTE, and a lot of people have developed problems related to recurrent head injuries, which can lead to dementia. And also illegal drugs can do it. Many other different toxic causes can induce a dementing type illness. But the big focus is on Alzheimer's disease, and I wanted to just talk about that because this is a really, really important concept. I think the two major factors in the generation of Alzheimer's disease are the microcirculation. So if you think about the big pipes coming out of the dam are the big arteries that go to your heart or to your brain, then the smaller pipes are the pipes in your street, but the tiny pipes in your house and the tap, that's the microcirculation.
Yeah.
So if you survive your vascular years, there's a wash down effect from the bigger vessels into the smaller vessels, and you have a defective microcirculation. So the smaller vessels get clogged because it's easy to clog them because they're tiny. So all the sludge and muck gets around there. And then here's the next thing. Every time you have a thought or an emotion, there is a waste product created in your brain.
Amazing.
Every time anything happens in the body, there's a waste product created from that chemical reaction, and that has to be washed out of the system. So you need a very good microcirculation to flush all the crap out, so to speak. But you also need a good immune system. And here's the other thing with Alzheimer's. The immune system in the brain is called the glial cells, and the glial cells typically come out at night and wash all the garbage out. So it's a bit like the cleaners going to the big buildings in the city to do their job when the staff have gone so they don't get in the way. It's the same thing that happens with these glial cells. When you have a rest, that's when the glial cells really rev up their work to flush all the crap that's going through the system and should be flushed out by good microcirculation. But you see, now here's the issue, that as that's happening, as the glial cells come in and you wash all the stuff out, what's happening is you're creating these little bits of junk protein that are usually eliminated by the glial cells and the microcirculation. And these junk proteins are called amyloid proteins, and these things that go with them, like tau tangles, TAU is the other thing. So amyloid and tau proteins sort of mix up together in this accumulated junk. Amyloid tends to be on the outside of cells, the tau tangles tend to be on the inside of cells, and basically it just erodes away at all your normal nerves. So that's basically how Alzheimer's occurs. But here's another big issue. We're now calling type 2 diabetes, or any form of diabetes, now Alzheimer's is being called type 3 diabetes because, again, if the diabetics survive their vascular years, they have a marked increased risk for Alzheimer's as they get older. And another big thing is what we call the ApoE alleles. Now, why is that important? Well, as I've explained on previous podcasts, the way genetics works is you get one copy of a gene from mum, one copy of a gene from dad. Now, these particular genes called the ApoE genes are involved in cholesterol transport around the body. And we have three different types of genes. There's ApoE2, ApoE3, and ApoE4. So you're either, the normal one is 3-3. Most of us are 3-3, I'm 3-3. But Chris Hemsworth has just come out recently, the wonderful actor, Australian actor who lives down in Byron Bay.
Yeah.
And he said that he's found out that he's ApoE44, which is the worst possible allele, or the combination allele. So he's a heterozygote for ApoE4, which is often associated with dementia in your 50s and 60s, whereas if you're born with one ApoE4, that's dementia in your 70s and 80s. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get it. It just means you have a higher risk of getting it.
But that's a good segue into what I've heard a few neuroscientists speak about, prevention of Alzheimer's and dementia.
Yep.
And they're virtually saying that you've got to obviously look after your brain nutritionally, but exercise is amazing in creating new neural pathways, thinking differently. It's all part of it, and detoxing, and also avoiding things like alcohol. Although at the end of the day, red wine is probably the best alcohol to have.
Yeah, in low doses, of course. But can I go back to that, just to focus on the exercise for a second?
Yeah.
When you exercise, what are you doing? You're pumping more blood around the body. You're flushing more blood through all of your organs.
Yeah.
Exactly what I'm talking about with the microcirculation. And the studies are showing clearly, even just taking nutrition out of for a second, which I want to focus on soon. But if you take nutrition out of for a second, people who have a 3 to 5 hour a week exercise program, and more is not better, have a 30% reduction in progression to dementia just by doing that. So there's a guy called Dale Bresden. Now, Dale Bresden's written a book, The End of Alzheimer's Disease, and he has clinics in Southern California. You know how many Californians it takes to change a light bulb? The answer is 5, 1 to change the bulb and 4 to share the experience. And how many social workers it takes to change a light bulb? 10, 1 to change the bulb, 9 to workshop it. But how many psychiatrists it takes to change a light bulb? The answer is 1, but that light bulb has to really want to change. Okay, so let's talk about Dale's program, because he's done studies now. He's published studies where he has reversed Alzheimer's disease. And I'm not saying this works for everyone. And obviously, the earlier you pick this up and do this, the better. And now we're even talking about blood tests. So I interviewed a fellow on my radio show recently who's developed a pinprick test that can pick up the early markers of these tau proteins. You see, usually the tau proteins are intracellular in the brain, causing their trouble. But now what's happening is the tests are becoming so good, you get these little molecular footprints in your bloodstream. So a pinprick test that can pick up early tau proteins. Some other tests they develop where they pick up early amyloid proteins that have spilled into the bloodstream. So it's telling you that you may be predisposed to Alzheimer's 10 or 15 years down the track. Now, a lot of people say, I don't want to know about it. Well, you should want to know about it because A, we're now talking about reversal of Alzheimer's disease, and the earlier you know, the better off it is. But B, we're also going to get on to, we'll finish off talking about a vaccine for Alzheimer's disease, which I think is really, really exciting. And I'll get onto that finally when we talk about all the treatments available. So let's.
So are you going to include like natural treatments?
Yeah, I'm getting onto all of this. So let's firstly focus on the components of Dale's program. There are 4 components.
Okay.
Now, component number 1, and I believe the most important one, is lifestyle modification.
Yeah.
And we've spoken on a prior podcast about the 5 keys of being healthy.
Yeah.
And they're absolutely vital in starting to reverse heart disease, and starting to reverse Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah.
And a lot of the studies are showing now, I mentioned heart disease, a bit of a Freudian slip there, because all the risk factors for heart disease are the same risk factors for Alzheimer's disease, because it's a washdown effect from the bigger blood vessels into the microcirculation. So if you start working on your lifestyle, not when you're 65 or 70, it's still some benefit from doing it, but start doing it when you're 30 or 40, then you're going to reap the benefits later on. It's like paying insurance. You mightn't use it now, but you may need it later on. So don't start saying, I'll start exercising when I'm 60. Start exercising as soon as you can start exercising, and keep doing it for the rest of your life. But what Dale's program is firstly a sound nutritional program. So they've developed this thing called the Mind Diet, where basically they've combined the very good aspects of the Mediterranean diet, the very good aspects of the DASH diet for hypertension, but there's nothing flash about these diets. It's just, it's mother's milk stuff that we talk about all the time. It's having the leafy green vegetables, 2 or 3 pieces of fruit per day, especially the blueberries, strawberries, and all of those things, loaded with these things called polyphenols, which you mentioned red wine before. You get the benefit from red wine, not from the alcohol, but from the plant chemicals, the very strong polyphenols in red wine, the polyphenols in dark chocolate, greater than 70% cocoa, the polyphenols in blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, all of those berries. And that's where you get the benefit. So people talk about what you shouldn't eat, but I'm saying what you should eat is the fruits and vegetables. So we should mainly have a plant-based diet. Yeah. And that's what the Mediterranean diet is. That's what the DASH diet is. That's what the Mind diet is, and the MEND program by Dale Bresnan. So it's all focuses on high-quality nutrition. And the problem is, Homer, let's be unsubtle here, because you and I aren't particularly subtle in any way. People are too fat. And the more weight people lose, the less chance they have of getting Alzheimer's disease as they get older. I'm not saying thin people can't get Alzheimer's disease, because you might have a really bad ApoE4 allele or some of the other genes. But I'm saying keep your weight down, which is a very important.
But remember the obesity paradox, Ross.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about people carrying a little bit of fat around their belly. I'm talking about major fat people. I'm talking about major obesity. Okay.
So what's that? What's morbidly obese? Is that 20 kilos?
Morbidly obese? No. Morbidly obese is a BMI greater than 40. Okay. Standard obesity is a BMI greater than 30. But noting that first grade footballers have a BMI greater than 30 because their muscle weighs heavily. So I like people to focus more on what I call relative fat mass. Very simple equation. It's not as simple as BMI, but with the relative fat mass, you want to take, for a male, 64 minus, now this is in brackets, 20 times your height divided by your waist circumference. Yeah. That is your relative fat mass for a male. That should be less than 25%. Yeah. For a female, it should be 64 minus, again, 20 times your height divided by your waist circumference, but you add 12 to that, and women want to be less than 35%. Okay. If you're less than that, your weight's fine. Don't worry about it. This is relative fat mass. So
we're going to broach this in another podcast, but don't you think that most GPs would be reluctant to tell a patient that they're fat and they need to lose weight? Do you think they have difficulty?
I don't think so. I mean, it's not being fattest. It's just making an observation. And the point is, there's a wonderful joke about the donkey whisperer. Now, this fellow was said to be the best donkey whisperer in town, and he could fix up any ornery donkey. And this fellow took this donkey to the donkey whisperer. He said to him, "Look, my donkey's just doing my head in." He said, "You got to do. I hear you're the best donkey whisperer in town." The guy says, "Yeah, I'm the best donkey whisperer in town." He said, "Can you fix up my donkey?" He says, "Of course I can." He said, please fix him up. So he picks up a bit of 4B2 and goes whack over the donkey's head. And the guy says, "What you doing that to my donkey for?" And the guy says, "First, you got to get their attention." It's true. So look, I'm not known for my subtlety, and I will often tell people that they're carrying far too much weight. And I had this conversation with a patient the other day. He came in and he's morbidly obese. Now, he's already had aortic surgery. He's had his aorta replaced. And I said to him, and I won't say his name, but I said to him, look, you can have your aorta replaced, but I said, if you want to live more than 5 years, you've got to get rid of that gut. Now, I said that to him.
Yeah.
And he wasn't offended. He knew it was obvious.
Yep.
But I had to whack him across the head to get his attention.
But doctors have difficulty being lifestyle practitioners. They're always time poor, and the quickest thing is the prescription. Okay, we'll see you next week. That's
it might be. But I spend a lot of my time talking about the 80-10-10 rule. 80% lifestyle, 10% pharmaceutical drugs if you need it, 10% supplements. So that's diet.
Yep.
Now, we've already mentioned exercise, and exercise is, in my view, should be 2/3 cardio, 1/3 resistance training, 3 to 5 hours a week. And that's been shown to have the beneficial effects on Alzheimer's. But again, in Dale Bresden's programs, sleep is really important, because if you don't get good quality sleep, that immune system doesn't come out at nighttime and wash all the crap out of your skull. And that's really, really important that you get good quality sleep. But then the obvious other things, the other two components of the 5 keys of being healthy: don't smoke, don't drink too much grog, don't use illegal drugs. I mean, people who think illegal drugs do anything for us, it's just nonsense. These are poisons that kill you. And then finally, manage the stresses in your life. Because if you're stressed, and also things like depression, you must get your depression treated. There's a strong link between depression and Alzheimer's disease, and social connection.
Yes.
I mean, the 80-year study from Harvard University called the Grant Study. The one key to health and happiness is to have someone else in your life who loves and cares for you, who you love and care for. Really nurture and develop your human connections with people. So that's the lifestyle component of Dale's program, but it's a lifestyle component of any sensible doctor's program. The 5 keys of being healthy, which I talk about all the time. So number 2 is the appropriate use of nutraceuticals.
Yeah.
Now, the nutraceuticals, there's a whole host that have been shown to work in the Alzheimer's space. One of the emerging things that I'll mention first is things called plasmalogens. And these plasmalogens are a form of omega-3, and omega-3 and a few other omega fatty acids as well, but have enormous benefits in improving brain function. So watch this space. That's something that maybe in another podcast we'll focus on. I'll get an expert on plasmalogens to talk on the podcast.
Okay, just on omega-3, is it true that the brain has got the highest level of omega-3? More than any other organ.
Of course, and you see the blood-brain barrier is a very fatty membrane full of omega-3s and a whole lot of other things. So if you're not getting the omega-3s into those fatty membranes, the fatty membrane doesn't work properly, and it's easy for toxins to cross across the brain and get into the neurons and cause their damage. So that's plasmalogens and omega-3s. There's also a drink people can drink called Suvinate, and there's a couple of drinks like this that have got a whole lot of different nutrients that does have some evidence base behind it. Now, something that we spoke about in a couple of podcasts ago is the vital importance of having a high-quality 4th-generation folic acid, B12, B6. A fellow called Professor David Smith from a little-known university in England called Oxford, he's done these 2 major trials, the VitaCog trial and the Optima trial, and he showed in well over 200 people with early Alzheimer's disease, what we call mild cognitive impairment, which is the precursor to Alzheimer's disease. This was a randomized controlled trial going for 3 years, gave half of them folic acid B12, B6, the other half placebo, showed a 30% reduction to progression to Alzheimer's in the people taking the 3 B vitamins. But I think the study would have been done so much better if they used the 4th-generation folic acid to bypass that MTHFR gene that we spoke about a few weeks ago. So I think there's a great benefit from people taking a high-quality multivitamin. Anyone listening to this, please source the 4th-generation multivitamin. You can send an email in to us, and we can tell you what that is. We just can't mention it publicly because the TGA will not let me as a doctor make those comments. And then we've already mentioned omega-3, but it's really interesting that a mate of mine called Professor Andrew Papinkas, who works down at Swinburne University, has done an enormous amount of work to show that good quality multivitamins and omega-3 work together to improve brain function. So I think that's something that's very important. And then there's a pretty good combination of ginkgo biloba, brahmi, and a thing called phosphatidylserine that's also been shown. And some work, and I know Dale Breslin's pretty keen on this, is curcumin, which is the very good anti-inflammatory, because there's said to be a strong basis, as you so rightly mentioned before, Homer, of inflammation and Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah.
So that's the second component, which is nutraceuticals. Now, the third component is brain training. And studies have shown in people over the age of 70, there are 5 components to maintain brain sharpness. Number 1 is keep working.
Yes.
Or if you retire, at least maintain your interest in your profession. So I'll give you an example. I have an 86-year-old physician who wants to maintain his registration, but he doesn't want to work as a doctor. He just wants to maintain his registration. He was one of my senior consultants when I was a junior registrar. I've known him for 41 years. He still comes to my practice a couple of times a week and sits in for a few hours just to sit there and listen to what I say to people.
Yeah.
And it maintains his registration because of that. And this man, you'd look at him and you think, you're not 86. He still skis. He's still rock fishing. He's a rock fisherman, and he's an intelligent, engaging man. And because he's maintaining that interest in what he's doing.
This is what I speak about a lot, is having a sense of purpose in life as you get older, and not retire, but refire in life. A lot of people, the old adage, a lot of people die at 80 but don't get buried until they're 50, or the other way around. They die at 50.
Die at 50, they don't get buried until they're 80,
Yeah, it's true. And you've got to have this sense of purpose to your life, and have a real, ideally, a passion for what you do.
Well, my hobby, my interest outside of medicine is nuclear physics. Now, I'm not a nuclear physics genius at all. My knowledge of nuclear physics, if you look at the whole thing, if you say 100%, my knowledge would be 1%. But I still understand it to some extent.
Really?
And there's a guy called Roger Penrose, who's won the Nobel Prize in nuclear physics. I was listening to an interview he's giving the other day, and he said, and when I write my next book, he's 93, for goodness sake. And I just love that. As you say, you've got to have a passion. I tell this wonderful story about a guy called Luigi, who I saw years ago. And he came in to see me, he waltzed in, sat down, and I looked at his date of birth, and it said he was 92. And I said, Luigi, you've written your date of birth down incorrectly. He said, no, doctor, I'm a 92. And I said, Luigi, what's your secret? And he said, doctor, you got to have a passion. I said, what's your passion, Luigi? He said, growing orchids. And Luigi went on to tell me how he'd won 13 world gold medals for his orchids and about 2,000 awards over the years.
Yeah.
And anyhow, I checked him out. His heart was great. I said, Luigi, you're fine. You don't need to come back. Anyhow, he came back a year later to see me. I said, Luigi, you've come back. He says, yeah, I like you, doctor. And he sat down and he said, Luigi, I said to him, Luigi, you don't know how many people I've told about your 13 world gold medals, your 2,000 awards for your orchids. He says, doctor, 14.
Yes.
Yes.
See how sharp he was too.
He was unbelievable. So number 1, keep working, maintain your interest in your profession. Number two is to be open to change, because as people get older, they tend to do the same things with the same people in the same way, and nothing ever changes. So I say to people, do things differently. One of the great minds of last century was Edward de Bono, the lateral thinking man. And he talks about watering a hill, but if you've got a fixed tap on that hill, it's only going to water the bit where the water dribbles down. You've got to water the whole hill. So do different things with different people in different ways. So, for example, people who are bilingual have much less dementia than people who speak one language. Now, I'm paucilingual, I struggle with English, but my brother speaks 8 languages, 4 of them dead. So I'm just saying that's a wonderful thing to do. And then number 3 is be open to change. Number 2 is open to change. Number 3 is use it or lose it. So do challenging things, read interesting books, watch interesting documentaries, do courses, do Sudokus, do crosswords. All of those things are incredibly good for your brain.
Because your brain's like a muscle, and even different, thinking differently. I remember this neuroscientist speaking at this conference, and she said, if you want to have a really good exercise to reverse dementia, Alzheimer's, the whole lot of it, whistle old songs to yourself. Either whistle old songs that you haven't heard for a while, or try and pick a song that you really loved in the 70s and 80s and just sing it to yourself. And I do that when I'm walking the dogs all the time. And also the fact that I speak 3 or 4 languages, that might give me immunity for this
very
ailment.
Good for you.
Yep.
So you keep it up. So that's number 3.
Yep.
Okay. Number 4 is to hang around with optimistic people.
Yes.
So you see, you find that as people get older, all they want to do is talk about their illnesses. I mean, we'll go for dinner with some people I don't know that well on a Saturday night, and they go, "Oh, doctor, you'll be interested in this." I'll say, "No, I won't. That's a consultation. Make an appointment with me on Monday. I don't want to talk about medicine on a Saturday night." Yeah. And so again, don't focus on stuff that's negative. Focus on positive things. Hang around with positive people that want to be positive. And then finally, the most important thing is to be positive yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, people come into my practice, "How you going today?" "Well, I'm not dead." "Oh, gee."
Yeah, I know.
I mean, seriously, I'm still alive.
It takes training to do that. So I'll mention my father-in-law, my late father-in-law. He's a lovely guy that's like Slim Dusty. He's a country western singer. He's a painter, lovely guy. But his name was Dougie. And if you asked him how he was, he'd say, "You can't win if you're always losing."
Yeah, well, he's right.
And then the other thing he'd say is, "I've never seen things get that bad that they couldn't get worse." So there's people that are, and he wasn't like this. I mean, he was a pleasant guy, but there are psychic vampires out there that suck out all the positive energy in you. And you've got to make a conscious decision, as you were inferring, to hang around positive people that enrich your life somehow.
So the point I'm making from all this is the third component of Dale Bresden's programs is to keep the little grey cells working. And I've just given the 5 keys of doing that. The final component's a really interesting one, which is direct cranial stimulation, which is a little pad that goes outside the brain. It's completely painless, sends electromagnetic impulses into the brain as well. And as I said, he's shown reversal of Alzheimer's disease. And the problem is, Homer, that in Australia at the moment, it's estimated around 420,000 people are suffering some form of dementia. It's estimated that around 1 million people are in some way engaged in the management of those people, either professionally or personally. So that means 1.5 million people either have dementia or are involved in the management of dementia out of 25 million people. It's a very common condition. It's the commonest cause of death in women. It's really a serious issue that needs good long-term management, and I don't think at the moment we're getting there. So let's now talk about the final component. And the final component is drug therapy. So for the last 20 years, we've had these things called anticholinesterase inhibitors, cholinesterase inhibitors, these drugs that have been used, and I think they're pretty ineffective. They might do a little bit, but not much. And then over the past few years, there's been these monoclonal antibodies, which are injections or infusions that have come through, and they've shown a slight reduction, like a 25% reduction in progression to symptoms.
Yeah.
Not as good as, mind you, Professor David Smith's stuff with the multivitamins, but about 30 to 40% of people who get these monoclonal antibodies get brain swelling. So that's a bit of a concern in itself. But just recently, some companies are coming out now with some vaccines against the amyloid and tau proteins with some really good responses in experimental animals. So they're starting to start the human trials, and they're suggesting that by 2030, these things may be standard of care. And the way that the trials are going, they give 4 or 5 injections in the first year, then maintenance injections thereafter. So when someone says, I don't want to know about my risk for Alzheimer's disease, what I'm saying is, yes, you do, because at the moment, the treatment mightn't be that good, although I think the programs are terrific if you want to get yourself involved in the programs. And there are practitioners in Australia who all they do is these programs. So they are available in Australia. So if anyone wants to know, I can put them onto some people who are involved in these programs. But what I'm saying is you do want to know because there is something you can do about it. And in fact, I believe most chronic illnesses are reversible if you get them early and you do something about it.
So go for a casual stroll through an aged care home. I'd like to know what the statistics of dementia and Alzheimer's is in that. It wouldn't be.
I can tell you. From 65,
you've
got a 10% chance of getting some degree of dementia, cognitive impairment, etc. Once you hit 85, it's getting to about 30-40%.
Okay, so go for a casual stroll through a blue zone.
Yep.
You wouldn't find too many. How many in the blue zone?
Not many at all.
So,
but you see, that's the point. People say, it's inevitable if you get Alzheimer's. There's nothing you can do about it. And if you're going to get it, you're going to get it. But how come we don't see that so much in the blue zones?
Yeah.
And the reason being is because they've lived the proper lifestyle principles all of their life. They've never heard of damn Lipitor to lower their cholesterol.
No.
They've never heard of gyms. They basically just live these wonderful natural lives.
Okay. So we've got some we've done on that. That's a really interesting subject, and I think we'll get a fair few emails in from that one from our listeners. This is a question. This is Reg from Orange.
Yep.
I will soon need a hip replacement. I'm in my early 70s. I read an article recently explaining the benefits of a porcelain hip joint instead of a titanium replacement joint. Do you have any opinions as to which one would have a better for older patients? And I'm aware that you've had a knee replacement.
Yeah. I've had a titanium knee replacement. Look, I haven't seen any studies to show that there's any benefits of a porcelain hip over a titanium hip. I think it's best to have the one that has the long-term evidence base, personally, because often you find with these newer hips that are allegedly better, then something happens 5-10 years down the track when you've got the thing in. And whereas I've had people who've had hip replacements 15-20 years away and they're still doing fine. So, Reg, I would just go with whatever your orthopaedic surgeon who you're seeing is suggesting.
Okay. Monty from Devonport.
Yep.
It's in Tassie, isn't it? It
is in Tasmania, no doubt.
It's not the end of the earth, but you can see it from there. Same postcodes. Okay.
Yeah.
My mum was a firm advocate of the adage, an apple a day keeps the doctor away.
One would hope not.
Is this just an old wives' tale? Or is there some scientific truth behind this saying?
Yeah, look, there is to some extent, because apples are incredibly good for you. There's so many different natural chemicals in apples that are so protective. But I really think it should be 2 or 3 pieces of fruit per day, 3 to 5 servings of vegetables per day keeps the doctor away, not just an apple a day.
Okay. We've got another 2. Lorna from Lightning Ridge is where? Where's Lightning Ridge?
Lightning Ridge.
Northern Territory.
No, I don't think so. No, I think Lightning Ridge is in Queensland,
okay.
But I'm not entirely sure, and I would happy to stand corrected on that one. But I know it's somewhere near the New South Wales-Queensland border, I think.
Or Mount Isa way. No, okay. I'm travelling to the Gold Coast theme parks with my grandchildren this school holidays and take a regular pill to help regulate my blood pressure. Is it dangerous for me to travel on a roller coaster, for example, or should I stick to the Dodgem car?
Can I just tell you that one of my dear mates is the owner of all the theme parks in the Gold Coast? So
okay.
So look, let me say to you, there's something you can't measure in your bloodstream. It's called pleasure.
Yeah.
And if you've got a bit of blood pressure and you're on a blood pressure pill, it's not going to hurt at all if you enjoy it. If they terrify you, don't go anywhere near the damn things.
Yeah.
So I think we go to theme parks, for our grandchildren's sake, and have a bit of fun. So go and have a bit of fun, and I wouldn't be too worried about it.
Yeah.
But if you've had coronary artery bypass grafting and some of the grafts are blocking up, don't go on a roller coaster.
I learned that when I did phys ed recreation always that thin line between risk and fun.
Yeah.
So we can't.
And you've got
yeah.
and look, I say this to my patients all the time. You can't measure pleasure in the bloodstream. You got to have a bit of fun.
Okay. Mark from Port Macquarie, which is in New South Wales on the coast.
It certainly is. It's just below. It's an hour and a half below Coffs Harbour.
Like many other people, I have sporadic bouts of lower back pain after being on my feet for too long or spending too many hours in the garden. I'm 40 years old and have never sought any treatment. I'm considering going to a professional, but should I see a chiropractor, physio, or an osteopath? I'm a big fan of osteopaths because they massage first and they give you a nice little manipulation. In America, they're known as doctors, aren't they? Not here. They're not. I don't know. I know. Chiropractors, I think, that get into you, they do a quick little thing and then out the door. And physios, I think, are okay. I mean, you'd probably go for physios, would you?
No. Look, I'd probably go for whatever works best for that person. I don't want to start the war with the chiropractor versus the osteopath versus the physio. I think they're all useful in their own way. I've had manipulation of my back, and I've got to say it terrified me. I didn't like it at all, but other people love it. I've been to an osteopath, I've been to a physio, and I had very good service from both. I think my answer is pretty straightforward. We're all different. Whatever works for you, by all means, explore it and see what, because there's many ways to skin a cat. Let me also say, I don't know anyone over the age of 60 who doesn't have a crappy neck and a crappy back. It's a medical term, but we all do to some extent because we're not supposed to be here. But in your 40s, it's an issue that does need to be managed. And I say to all my patients that it's not only important to have a practitioner who might give you some treatment like massage, like mobilization, and I prefer mobilization over manipulation. But it's also important to have a regular back exercise program. So every day, because of my crappy neck and crappy back from too much sport, I do weights and stretching every morning for about 15, 20 minutes. It's a routine I do. And if I don't do it, my back gets in a bad way. Now, also, I have a fellow who comes to my practice every week, and he's become one of my very dear friends, and he gives me a treatment called MedKey. Now, MedKey is a handheld electromagnetic device that is much better than a TENS machine, and this stuff sends electromagnetic pulses into the area. It says where the problem is and delivers the pulses where the problem is. It's diagnostic and therapeutic.
And can you feel it like a TENS machine?
Oh, you can feel it, but it's very pleasant.
Okay.
And at the end of it, because he's also balancing the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and rejuvenation system. So at the end of it, you feel a pleasant, slightly drugged feeling because he's released all of these wonderful endorphins. So it's a really lovely treatment. It's called MedKey, MEDKEY. Okay. You can Google it. He's the master practitioner in Australia. He teaches people around Australia how to do this technique. And sometimes the bastard goes on holidays and I get sciatica when he does. But it's maintenance therapy. It doesn't cure anything. But I don't want to have back surgery. Now, back surgery is effective for some people. And my back would go probably every 2 or 3 months, and then Chris just fixes it up with the MedKey therapy. I had to have an injection into my lumbar spine just towards the end of December. It was highly effective. So there are, what I'm saying is there's many different treatments available. The most important point I'd make here, Rob, is not to suffer in silence, because there's something that can be done. Find out who works best for you. Massage therapist, osteopath, physiotherapist, chiropractor, whatever works for you is fine, because there are many ways to skin that cat.
Okay, so Ross, just on that, I spoke at the Australian Spinal Conference, and they said the two best exercises for the spine are walking and swimming. Not running, and obviously cycling. There's orthopedic complications from falling off and blah, 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 but not if you're doing it stationary. You have to be a big klutz to fall off a stationary bike. But,
mine's just sitting there. Yep.
We'll take a photo.
Never fallen off at once.
Okay. So we'll finish this podcast with a few dad jokes. I've got two. Don't drink drive. It's the dishwashing detergent. And not many people know that Yoko Ono changed the name after John Lennon died to Honorano.
Oh, gee. Well, look, I could finish off with two slightly better than those. Firstly, this naked man is standing next to an elephant, and the elephant says, "How on earth can you breathe through that?" And Homer, I'm so excited about the Amateur Autopsy Club I've just joined. Tuesday's open mic night.
So on that, it's goodbye for podcast number 10. If you want more information, please go to Seriously Funny Wellbeing. Ross and I are also available to speak at UNX conference, special event or product launch. And we'll see you at the next podcast. Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.
Hello, listeners in Australia. I've got a big secret to let out about my good friend, Homer Papantonio, the corporate imposter. He's the best speaker I've ever heard. I only deal with the best. He's a great athlete, great cyclist too. And the real reason he's the best is that he uses the best omega-3 supplements on the planet, produced by Zinzino. Homer needs to perform at his absolute best on and off the stage. That's why he takes the best omega-3 supplement on the planet.
Well, yeah, I know about Homer taking Zinzino Omega-3. I've been using it too. It's derived from highest quality ingredients from all natural sources. These Omega-3 balanced oils are molecularly tested for toxins to ensure only the purest and freshest ingredients are used. You can even have a blood test to see what your Omega-3 status is.
Oh yeah, this Omega-3 from Zinzino is the single most scientifically supported supplement on the planet. And the health outcomes are big, really, really big. It's an absolute no-brainer for every man, woman, and child. It's the best, the biggest, and the best. And you can buy it at ZZOMEGA.com. ZZOMEGA.com.
Like Homer, I've been sucking on Zinzino Omega-3 capsules and solutions for the past year. It helps reduce Alzheimer's and dementia risk, inflammation, mood, improve sleep and immunity, and the list goes on and on and on and on, like you do.
Don't worry about it. Well, Zinzino Omega-3 is the best. I only deal with the best. Go to ZZOMEGA.com. That's ZZOMEGA.com. Simply the best.